Hello, welcome to the beginner tutorial for Blender 3.3. So in this tutorial we're just going to go over some basics of what happens when you go into the Blender for the first time, and basically to try and move around in Blender and maybe change some panels, see what's where and stuff like that. So when you go in the Blender, you're going to be greeted with this Blender welcome screen, and in here you're going to see just few stuff, and that is some visual content here, and then the list of the new files if you have any different layouts that you want, your recent files that you have been opened, and then you have from most recent to least recent, and then you can just open maybe a specific file that you have. For right now we can just click away from this, and then we have this viewport that we are greeted with. To move around in Blender, what we can do is first hold middle mouse, and when you hold middle mouse we can just rotate around whatever objects we have selected. If we want to move from left to right, we can hold Shift, and if we hold Alt, we can basically snap by clicking middle mouse button, and we can basically snap from each view that we want. But if we release Alt, we can just smoothly move around. So that is kind of the basics of how you can move around, and then you have the selection, which will be on your left click. And on the right click you can see some settings for your currently selected mesh. So if you want to move around the scene, this is how you do it. And these are just shortcuts which you can avoid if you, let's say, click in here. So if I click on this sphere in here, I can just rotate around the object. I can also click on one of the sides here and we can snap to that view. In Blender, usually you would want to use shortcuts. Blender is really shortcut heavy, so that's something that I would encourage. So when I try to move around, I mainly use the middle click and then Shift, and this way you can really easily move around in your level. Now let's say you want to move to some object that is really far away. Going like this to your object, it will be a bit more, it will take a bit more time. So what you can do is select your object that you want to move to, and then if you click the delete button on your numpad, it will automatically snap onto your object. So this is a really easy way to just select whatever you want, snap it, and then when you try to rotate around, it will rotate around your selected character. So this is the viewport. Let's go over some basic settings that we have in here. On the left we have a few tools that we can basically use. So we can also use in here to move, rotate our object. So if I click on this, we can see that we're going to get a move. We can also click G. This is going to give us a shortcut for this. We can also click S for scale and R for rotate, but of course you can also click on these buttons here. Now I usually stay into the selection mode and then just use the shortcuts for moving objects. It gets a bit easier, but you can also do everything in here. Next thing that we have is our modes. So whenever you have the objects, any object selected, you have different modes that you can be in. So right now we are just kind of editing whole objects, but if I want to edit specific vertices or faces or something like that of the object, what I can do is click object mode and change it to, let's say, edit mode. Now we are in the edit mode where we can basically start moving individual vertices around. And you can see that when we change from edit object mode, some settings in here change. So in edit mode we have different settings to let us customize our object. So I can go to edge selection and I can select whole edges. I can select faces. This gives me all the customization I need to edit the object. And then there is also some settings that you can go into when you're in the edit mode and have something selected. You can also go into, let's say, mesh and choose maybe to flip normals, do merge stuff. So you have a bunch of options in here. Now let's say that you have an option that is not, you can see that next to each option you have a shortcut, and I would advise, if you are using something frequently, to remember the shortcut. But what you can also do is click on any option in Blender, and if you click right click and then add to quick favorites, now when you don't have any menu, when you're just in your viewport, you can just click Q, and in here you can see that we have this bisect that I just added, and also there is some shortcut that I have from before that is set in here. So what you can do is have any option in here and just add it to your quick favorites. And then when you click Q, you can just have a list of your frequent stuff that maybe does not have active shortcut right now. Of course, you can go to edit preferences and in here map your bindings and stuff like that. But sometimes you just quickly want to add a shortcut, and that is really nice way and unique way for Blender to kind of add the shortcuts that you want. Now if we go back to our object mode, we can see that there is some other options in here. And one also useful way in Blender to kind of move around and use some action is to click F3. And this way you can see all of the things that you could do in Blender is kind of listed in one huge list. And here, of course, I would not advise scrolling, but actually clicking in the search bar and typing. So let's say I want to scale our object. I could just type scale and then we are going to get the scale action. Now, of course, for a lot of things, you'll just have it in here. So maybe you don't need to go there, but you would see that there is a lot of things that you could do. So let's say I want this shade smooth option. So I'll just click F3 and type shade smooth, and then we can just get the effect. So I would also advise using this and trying to get used to basically using that option, because at any point you can just type whatever you want and you can get it instantly without trying to go and finding it in these menus. So that way basically you can just remember the action name and then you can so you can basically use it. So maybe sometimes what I use this for is maybe origin to selected or cursor to world origin, or we can type selected and then we can cursor to selected, and then whatever we have selected currently, our cursor is gonna go here. So that is kind of an example. Also I can click Shift C to bring my cursor back to the middle. But yeah, those easy shortcuts I usually select in here, so I don't actually even know where the location is, because this is just so convenient. I can quickly click F3 and type whatever I want. Now we are still in the layout menu, and this is kind of different menu or different templates for different windows. So depending on what you're currently doing, you don't want all of the windows being opened. So this menu is where everything happens. So if we go outside of our viewport, we have our outline for all of the stuff in our scene. So we have our scene collection, which is kind of a master collection. And in here we have everything basically will be in your scene collection, and then you can create individual collections for your stuff. So what you can do is create a new collection, and let's name it maybe objects. And then we could just put our cube into our objects. This, you could look at this like a folder or something like that. And when you put it in here, you have some control where you can completely disable it, maybe just make it invisible or something like that. So you can have different collections for all of your stuff to better organize it. And you can also in here change the modes that you're seeing. So maybe you just want to see specific data about stuff or whatever. Usually you would be able to change it in here. But our view layer is kind of default where you want most of the times to be. And now when we select something, we are seeing that on right we have this details panel, and this is usually expanded depending on what you click. So if I click on the light, there is some different options, but also there is a lot of the same options. So we can see that these top options are not changed. So they are generally for your rendering. So you won't get any different options if you are switching to which object you have selected. And then we all be the same as like scene, layers, your world, stuff like that. So that will be all the same, but then you have your options specific to the objects that you have currently selected. And in here we have first the options for our cube, so general just for our object, so that would be name, location, rotation, scale of our object, collection, stuff like that. Next we have modifiers. This is important one where you can add different options to modify your mesh. So maybe I want to let's see, maybe we want to subdivide our object. We can just click subdivide, and in here we can just create it more and more detailed. So you can add different modifiers to your object and change it in some way. There is also some different ones like particles, but we don't want to go into that. Another important one is materials. So what material is currently applied to your object. And for us, we right now have just a default material with some default options. And we will later check out our materials or our shading tab to just quickly see different tabs of what they're doing. So if we select, let's say, the light, we can see that we have different options. Now light is also an object, so we have all of the options for our object, but then we have different ones. So our light does not have a material, but we have this light option where we have things specific for the light, which is the power, the color, and some other options depending on what we want to do. Same for the camera, we can see this unique option for the camera, so you can see whatever is happening here. The next thing that we can do in Blender is if we click here on the side of each window, what we can do is move it around, but if we click on the edge, we can basically start changing stuff and cutting stuff. So if I click on this edge here, what I can do is basically separate my window, and now it becomes two windows. And this kind of how Blender works with windows, where now I can click in here and change what this window shows. So if I click on shader, and let's click on the material just to see it. Now we have this shader window that is completely changed from the viewport, and we have our world outline in here. So I can again separate this if I want. And now we have two windows, but we don't want the same windows, so you would click in here and change it to, let's say, timeline. And here we can see if we animated anything, we can move it around. Next thing that you can do is click right click in between and then click join areas. And this lets you kind of move things around. So now you can see I can split it again in here. So every time you click on here, you can split it. But if you don't want them split, you can join them in here. Now that we kind of know generally how to move around, and this is good if you want to kind of customize, you can also just click plus and you can duplicate the windows that you're on or just create a new one. And then basically customize. So maybe you are working on something really specific, so you need a specific template in Blender and you cannot use any of these. You can of course create your new template and basically have it in here, conveniently to just swap to it and have it there. So let's say we want to go into modeling. If I click in here, we can see this is kind of the default view that we had before. It also automatically set our mode to edit mode. So this is kind of if you want to model, and we have our object selected that is right now in the edit mode. If you go to sculpting, it will go into the sculpt mode, which we have in here, and then this window is still remain the same, and we're zoomed in into our object, and we can start modifying it. If you go to UV editing, now our windows are getting a bit more specialized. So we have a separate window for our UVs, so we can edit individual UVs for our selected object, and we also have the same windows in here. Let's go to texture paint. So we are going to go into texture paint mode in here, and also have our UV window in here, so we can basically start drawing. Also, our windows are becoming, the outline is becoming smaller just because you have a lot of details in here because you're in the brush mode. So this is the reason. So if you look at here, this is kind of your active mode window where you have all details for the brushes, so I can actually start painting on the object. And let's go to shading so you can see what's happening in here. And you can see we have added our shader editor, and then we have UV editor. We also have some folders, so we can actually click and find maybe our material, something like that. So this is another window. Let's see which one is open in here. In here it is the file browser. Now let's go to animation. So in here we have another preview window, so we can see that it's a preview window since we have this option to look at our scene. And then in here, so this would be like a window that you use specifically for previewing your animation. So maybe it's in a specific pose from which you want to see your animation, and then in here you're actually animating. And we have a timeline in here that basically shows us the frames, and we can scroll through them. So this is kind of the general idea of how Blender works. It is a big improvement from Blender before 2.x versions, so this would be 3.3. So yeah, the general idea is that you have your windows, you can separate them, move them around, and then you create your templates for different things that you are working on. So you have convenient windows opened at any point in time.